Dating should be straightforward, in theory. But in practice, it's a puzzle of missing pieces, overlapping timelines, and the occasional artifact that refuses to cooperate. Chronology is the backbone of archaeological interpretations. It's how we build meaning out of stratigraphy and context. But even with dating methods like radiocarbon, dendrochronology, and a whole toolkit of calibrated curves and typologies, we still get it wrong. Sometimes spectacularly. Maybe it's a piece of charcoal in the wrong layer. Maybe the sample was contaminated. Maybe a very old-looking object turns out to be not so old. Or maybe, just maybe, our confidence or ego got ahead of the data. So, first off, this episode was supposed to be about food. But because it was about food, my script kind of just turned into a mess of tangents and anecdotes that led down one rabbit hole and into another. So that one might take me a little while longer, and I hope my 3 listeners don't mind too much. But today's episode isn't about food, it isn't about heartbreak, but it is about dating disasters, the archaeological kind. The ones that reshape timelines, spark controversies, or just leave you staring at the lab report wondering what went wrong. I'm Lindsay, and this is Stratified. And today we're diving into the messiest part of doing this work, when time lies. Or worse, when we lie to ourselves about time. Every field has its scandals. Medicine has falsified trials. Physics has the faster-than-light neutrino that wasn't. In archaeology, we have Shinichi Fujimura. For decades, Fujimura was a star, known as the Hand of God. He had an uncanny ability to locate Paleolithic artifacts across Japan. Stone tools, hearths, and complex site layers that seem to extend humans' history beyond tens of thousands of years. He totally changed the narrative. His discoveries, often found far deeper than expected, pushed Japan's earliest human occupation back to 600,000 years ago. That's a huge leap from the 30 to 40,000 year estimate most archaeologists were working with. Fujimura wasn't just famous. He was trusted, revered. He became a kind of folk hero. Museums featured his finds. Textbooks cited his sites. Entire cultural heritage frameworks were revised. But some 25 years ago, in November of 2000, the Mainichi Shimbun, probably butchered that pronunciation, one of Japan's major newspapers, published a set of photographs that changed everything. In the images, Fujimura could be seen visiting a site before its official excavation date, digging a hole and dropping in artifacts. Turns out, the Hand of God was just his hand, carefully placing tools he'd collected from other locations into fresh test pits. The big discoveries? Planted. The amazing depth of the site? Fabricated. When caught, he confessed to everything. And it wasn't just one site. Over 42 sites were affected. More than 30 years of data was compromised. It was more than just a national embarrassment. So why did this work for so long? Because dating, even with radiocarbon and thermoluminescence and all of our fancy tools, is still guided by trust. Trust in your colleagues, trust in the methods, trust in the context. People believe what they want to believe. And that's why the Fujimura scandal hit so hard. It didn't just challenge a few data points. It questioned the entire structure of how we validate archaeological knowledge. And it wasn't just one guy being shady. It was a system that failed to verify, failed to ask the hard questions, and got swept up in the narrative of a single man who just kept finding exactly what everyone hoped was true. Fujimura was never a trained archaeologist. He started as a hobbyist, but he worked his way into leadership roles and into the center of the field, simply by producing results that people wanted. And honestly, that's the part that feels familiar. Because sometimes we want a site to date early. We want the carbon sample to say what the rest of the story, our story, already assumes. This isn't just about fraud, it's about desire. The desire for clarity, for significance, for something important. And that's when dating becomes dangerous. Every archaeologist has that one object, The one where you stare at it, tilt your head, squint, and think, what the f is this? For 3 amateur rock collectors near Olancha, California in 1961, that object was inside a geode, or what they thought was a geode. They cracked open the rock expecting quartz or fossil imprints. What they found instead looked suspiciously mechanical. A small, rusted metal cylinder complete with a threaded core. Cue dramatic music. Was it ancient alien technology? Proof of a lost civilization? Evidence that time travel was real? Nope, it was a 1920s champion spark plug. The Coso Artifact, as it became known, exploded into French archaeological lore. Books were written, magazine articles breathlessly speculated. It was declared an out-of-place artifact that shouldn't exist. But the science? The science had a simpler answer. It wasn't a geode. It was a concretion, a mineral buildup that can form around a foreign object in just decades under the right conditions. Get yourself some water, minerals, oxygen, add in a little bit of time, and bada bing, your spark plug looks ancient. The artifact was never analyzed in a lab. The original location was never properly documented. There was no stratigraphy, no soil profile, no associated material culture. Just a random rusty spark plug in a rock that fooled a lot of people who wanted to be fooled. And that's the heart of this entire episode. Context is everything. Without it, even something as recent as an engine part can pass for an archaeological anomaly. The Coso Artifact lives on in conspiracy circles and internet rabbit holes to this day. A reminder that sometimes the dating disaster isn't just a bad sample, it's our human tendency to make the mystery bigger than the evidence. Okay, now let's get into the nuts and bolts of how dating works. Like, actually works. Charcoal, calibrated curves, error ranges, and how sometimes even the best science still makes us guess. Radiocarbon dating is one of the most important tools in archaeology, and one of the most misunderstood. It shows up in the news like a magic wand. Researchers date site to 12,000 years ago. Boom, instant credibility. But radiocarbon dating is more like trying to figure out what time it is based on how long your coffee's been lukewarm. There's a process, but it's also full of assumptions. I'm going to break this down the best that I can and hope that chemists don't get mad at me for putting things so simply. Radiocarbon dating works by measuring the decay of carbon-14 in organic material. Things like charcoal, bone, seeds, shell. When a plant or animal dies, it stops taking in carbon-14. From that moment, the clock starts ticking. Scientists can measure how much carbon-14 remains and estimate how long it's been since death. But the raw date they get, it's not a year. It's not even a single point in time. It's a range. And that range gets even weirder when you account for the calibration curve. The amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere hasn't been constant over time. Solar activity, volcanoes, industrial emissions, they've all kind of messed with it. So we calibrate radiocarbon results against known fluctuations in the past, often using tree rings or other securely dated materials. That's why radiocarbon dates often come out like 2 sigma calibrated date range, 1275 to 1390 CE, which is both very helpful and kind of annoying. Now let's zoom into North America for a minute. In places like the Southern Plains, radiocarbon dating has a bit of a reputation. Multiple studies, which I'll list in the show notes, have noted inconsistencies in site sequences due to poor sample preservation, missed context, or contamination. Burnt rock middens, for example, are notoriously hard to date. Charcoal can migrate, soils get churned, and often the samples we pull aren't from the exact cultural layer we think they are. Even when things go right, dates can be stubborn. Take the Anzac site in Montana, a Clovis age burial site with some of the oldest and best preserved artifacts in North America. The radiocarbon date places the burial at roughly 12,600 years ago. But critics question the context. Was the burial intrusive into other deposits? Was the stratigraphy disturbed? Were the artifacts even associated? It took years and multiple rounds of dating and genetic analysis for the field to finally accept the result. And it's still debated in some circles. Or look at Kennewick Man, also known as the Ancient One. initially dated around 9,000 years ago, his skull shape led to a flurry of pseudoscientific speculation, with some arguing he wasn't indigenous at all. It wasn't until further testing and DNA sequencing that the picture became clear. He was ancestrally native. But that didn't stop years of legal, political, and academic back and forth about who he was and where he belonged. All that from a few dates and a lot of interpretation. Radiocarbon is powerful, but it's also fragile. The sample you choose matters. The lab you send it to matters. The calibration curve you use really matters. And even then, interpretation is everything. And this doesn't even touch the dating of stone tools or ceramics, which require whole different systems. Typology, context, thermoluminescence, obsidian hydration, which, yes, saying that out loud sounds like some new age spa treatment. Each method has its own quirks, and each has its own curveballs. So no, dating isn't magic. It's math, it's context, and it's a constant negotiation with uncertainty. Coming up, the moment when dating disasters don't just cause confusion, they rewrite the timeline. Let's stay close to home for a bit, because some of the most infamous dating disasters didn't happen in deserts far, far away or at the hands of fraudsters. They happened right here in North America. And in some cases, they changed the way we understand the continent's entire human timeline. Let's start with Clovis. For decades, Clovis culture was treated as the first, the gold standard for early human presence in North America. Distinctive fluted points, mammoth hunting, dated to around 13,000 years ago. The Clovis First model dominated archaeological thought for most of the 20th century, which made the discovery of older sites a little awkward, or at least heavily scrutinized. Monteverde in Chile, dated to about 14,500 years ago. People doubted it for years. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, possibly older than Clovis, but plagued by debates over stratigraphic mixing and radiocarbon contamination. The dates were there, but the belief took a lot longer. And that brings us to the Topper site in South Carolina. Topper produced stone tools that might date back 50,000 years ago, which would blow Clovis out of the water. But here's the catch. The artifacts were found in what's known as a clastic zone, basically gravel and floodplain deposits. Not the most secure context. Radiocarbon dates from nearby charcoal put the materials much earlier than Clovis. But are the artifacts really human-made or just oddly shaped rocks? The field is still divided. Then, in 2021, everything shifted again. Researchers at White Sands National Park in New Mexico published a paper in Science claiming that fossilized human footprints, real trackable prints, dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. Not stone tools, not charred bones, footprints. They were found in layers of ancient lakebed sediment, directly associated with seeds from aquatic plants, which were radiocarbon dated. The dates were repeated across multiple layers, and the stratigraphy was clean. But almost immediately, questions rolled in. Could the seeds be older than the prints? Were the dates from intrusive materials? How did they rule out contamination? Even now, some researchers remain cautious. Because the thing about early dates, especially dates that push us beyond Clovis, is that they make people nervous. Now let's talk about a little old site in Texas. Buttermilk Creek, also known as the Deborah L. Freakin site, near Salado. It's one of the strongest contenders for pre-Clovis occupation in North America. Excavations uncovered over 15,000 artifacts, many beneath the Clovis horizon. The oldest radiocarbon dates hover around 15,500 years ago. But the thing is, the tools are small. The stratigraphy is delicate. And while the researchers were rigorous, skeptics still ask, are these just redeposited Clovis flakes? Could water or bioturbation have moved them? Because in dating, confidence isn't just about what's in the ground. It's about whether people believe it should be there. And maybe that's the hardest part, the tension between evidence and expectation. Sometimes archaeologists are reluctant to date things at all. They stick to very, very vague descriptions like historic or prehistoric or post-contact. There's this quiet pressure to round things off, to file down the edges, to make the stories cleaner. But dating rarely gives us a story. It just gives us the data, and then we make up the story. Which is how misdated sites become origin myths, how contaminated charcoal becomes a population movement, how a single typo on a radiocarbon report can shift the timeline of an entire culture. And sometimes, it's not even the science that fails. It's our interpretation. Because humans, archaeologists included, are meaning-making machines. We want the oldest, the earliest, the breakthrough. And that desire, it messes with the math. Sometimes a new date doesn't just adjust our understanding of a site. It shifts the entire narrative. Sometimes even the whole field. So let's talk about Santorini. The island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, was the site of one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in recorded human prehistory. The explosion leveled the Minoan city of Akrotiri, buried it in ash, and, according to some, maybe have contributed to the decline of the Minoan civilization on Crete, and possibly even filtered into later stories of Atlantis. Based on pottery and cross-cultural connections with Egypt, most archaeologists dated the eruption to around 1500 BCE, give or take. But then came radiocarbon dating. In 2006, scientists dated an olive branch buried alive in volcanic tephra. The results? Roughly 1627 to 1600 BCE. That's a 100-year difference, which doesn't sound huge, unless you're an Egyptologist or someone whose career is built entirely on tight crossing data between civilizations. Yeah, the field kind of lost it. Egyptian chronology said one thing, radiocarbon said another. The calibration curve got scrutinized. The tree ring data was reevaluated, papers flew, conferences got heated, friendships were probably tested. Eventually, a partial compromise emerged. Maybe the eruption occurred in the early 16th century BCE. Not quite as early as the olive branch said, but also not quite as late as the pottery suggested. But the debate? Oh, it's still not settled. And it reminded everyone that dating, even when done perfectly, can still clash with interpretations. All right, now let's zoom back into North America. Cahokia, a place that I will talk about again and again. The sprawling Mississippian city just east of modern-day St. Louis was long believed to have declined around 1300 CE, a slow fade-out, probably due to environmental degradation or social upheaval. But more recent research suggests that the end came faster and later than previously thought. A combination of tree ring data, paleoclimatic analysis, and new radiocarbon samples pushed the site's major depopulation event closer to 1350 to 1400 CE, overlapping with extreme flooding and what some researchers call mega drought. The collapse didn't just happen, it happened hard. That subtle shift, just a few decades, changes how we understand the resilience of indigenous cities, their relationships with climate, and the way power rose and fell in North America long before Europeans arrived. These aren't just numbers, they're story pivots. They affect how we teach, how we fund, how we respect timelines that we weren't part of. And here's the kicker. We're still refining the tools, still updating the calibration curve, still arguing over whether that one flake of charcoal belonged to a hearth or a prairie fire that blew through 100 years earlier. Obsidian hydration, thermoluminescence, dendrochronology, they all have their moments. But even the best methods require careful context, human context. And humans, well, we're messy. Dating isn't really a science that's separate from us. It's a science that we interpret. We choose the sample. We tell the story. We write the report. And if we're not careful, our desire to make something make sense can lead us miles off course. So when we talk about dating disasters, we're not just talking about technical mistakes. We're talking about the moments when archaeology confronts its own assumptions. And sometimes, that's where the most growth happens. So the next time you're in the lab squinting at a charcoal fleck the size of a mouse turd, or in the field trying to decide if those rocks are actually part of a feature, just remember, even the best of us get the timeline wrong. That doesn't mean archaeology is broken. It means it's alive. It's human. It evolves. And dating, for all its disasters, still gives us the scaffolding we need to tell the stories that matter. This has been Stratified. And if you have an interesting story about dating or anything else really, you can email me at stratifiedpod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and may your radiocarbon samples always calibrate kindly.